Oh, it's nice. Great. It's nice to see some old colleagues and friends and some new faces as well. Welcome. Okay, so good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Carrie Norton, and I am here with my colleagues, Carolina Carvalho and Antoinette McLaughlin, and our other colleague who's here in spirit, Felicia Chavez. We are the System of Systems Thinkers, which is a mouthful, but we have that clunky title because we came together around the conversation and inquiry about what would it look like if systems thinkers could work together more effectively. Because ironically, in the systems thinking field, there's plenty of siloing. So we came together around that inquiry, and today we are hosting our 2026 series of women in systems thinking as our dialogues. And we are thrilled to bring to you Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker after, I don't know if she'd call it a hibernation, but she has not been around talking to groups of people for a while because she's been incubating something very exciting that she's going to be sharing with you all today for the first time. So we're really honored that she has chosen our audience to share her new material with. And again, just to say, we have been hosting these conversations with women to elevate the voices of women in the systems thinking field since 2021, I believe. And we have a portfolio of precious gemstones that we have had a chance to be in dialogue with these amazing women, world renowned women who have really given us the gift of their time, their presence, and their work to share with you all. And so Tamsin is in that line, that lineage of women from all over the world who've been sharing their voices with us and with our community. And so we're especially excited to see the women in this room, and also to the men who've chosen to be here to listen to women as we speak our truths. With that, I don't think I've forgotten anything, have I? We'll have at least one more session this year in the dialogue series, so be on the lookout for that. And you can see the recordings of every single conversation that we've had on our website, archived on our website and on our YouTube channel. And it is a rich treasure trove, as I said. So please enjoy. And with that, we don't typically do bios, and Dr. Woolley-Barker has a lot to say, so I'm going to turn it over to her to get started. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Wow, I'm really thrilled everybody's here. Yes, I call it a sabbatical. I gave myself a sabbatical to write this stuff. So I'm excited to share it with you. And I am coming from this location, although this is a Zoom background. Um, and it's hot out there. So I'm a little sweaty. So forgive me for that. Okay, I'm going to share my deck. And don't look at my background because it's crazy. And boom. You can see that okay? We can see that okay?
Yes, working fine.
Great. All right. That's my this is my community. You can go to that. It's free. That's me when I was, I guess, maybe 10, 11. But I was always, my parents came over from England when I was 2. And so I didn't have relatives in this country. So I found relatives in, the natural world and in books. I was a voracious reader. And all of these stories that I'm going to tell you are in this book right here that you can read. So I read all the time. And of course, I loved In the Shadow of Man, Jane Goodall's first book. And what I was struck by is that these were so clearly our relatives. So clearly, all the glimmers of what makes us human were present in them. And so I thought suddenly, if these are our relatives, then all the other animals must be as well. And I was kind of a lonely kid, but then I thought, they say that you're never more than 3 feet away from a spider. So I literally had relatives everywhere. My mom didn't like that as much as I did. But what struck me was that this was an unbroken line of survivors. These were miraculous survivors, all of us, these end twigs on this tree, and that just how miraculous that was. And that the world was always speaking to us. And the way that Jane, like Dr. Doolittle, could, she would, just by being patient and present and quiet and respectful, she gained entry to the world of these other creatures and could see through their eyes. And so that's what I tried to do. I practiced that all the time. I lived in San Diego, spent a lot of time in the tide pools and in the kelp forest. So I try to speak to the animals. And they're always speaking back to us if we listen. And it struck me that if these were all our relatives, then everything was connected. And I loved that kind of feeling of being in this story, emerging through all these perspectives and all the work of all these other creatures, co-creating the life that we are in. And I loved nature shows. And you can't really root for the cheetah or the gazelle, right? It's what they do together shapes them. If you put all of the cheetahs, if you put all the gazelles in cages to keep them safe, they get fat. They wouldn't be gazelles anymore. And if you put the cheetah in a cage, it would do the same. So it struck me very young that they were shaping each other, keeping each other the way that they are, their nature, and that they were co-creating the future that we're all in. And I just thought that was so lovely, and how blessed we are to be in that. But of course, the flip side is that if everything's connected, if you pull a string too hard, the whole thing could unravel. And that kept me awake. I was just really shocked. I spent a lot of time drawing at the zoo and what have you, and just drawing the animals. And so I would sit there and I would hear what people said. And it became really obvious that people didn't think that way at all. Like, they didn't see these other organisms as their relatives. They didn't see them as sentient beings with something to say. They were something to, laugh at and pay to poke at. So I spent a lot of time just late at night, the pictures of me at that time showed dark circles under my eyes. I thought, what could I do about this? And I couldn't come up with anything. And I thought, well, what could anybody do? And even that seemed beyond, what could you do? You'd have to change everything. It seemed too much. But my dad was an architect. And he'd bring me like tinker toys and stuff like that. And, it's just these simple rules of connection that emerge into these structures with this integrity, this beauty and strength. And I was struck by that. A good design mattered to him. It was really a moral issue for him. And what was funny about it is the thing that mattered most to him is that it blend in, and he tried to impart that to me with no success. I never did. but one thing that really stood out to me is that he would show me the trees in the neighborhood and how those simple rules were shaped for somewhere else. The eucalyptus would go up in flames in the dry Santa Ana winds, and the coral trees, which were pretty, when it rained heavily, they would just break, and they had shallow roots, so they just flip over. And it wasn't that they were poorly designed. It was that they weren't shaped by this place. And so that stood out to me, that the simple rules, the tinker toy that grow into these emergent, strong, beautiful shapes were shaped by that place, and they had an integrity that belonged to that place. Now, despite all this, his specialty as an architect was zoos and aquaria. And he, so he'd take me behind the scenes, and he did the penguin exhibit in the shark. This is the first glass tunnel. He did that. And the same rules applied. The same rules of good design, that the animals should be able to be comfortable there. They should be able to blend in and feel safe and content. And if they did, it might save their species. And that's how he sold it to me, was that they were in the zoo or the aquarium, you know, because otherwise their habitats were gone in the wild. And that's why we were doing it. I thought that was commendable. But it did get me thinking, you know, giraffes, you can keep them corralled just with a single step. It's a mental thing. You know, they're afraid of heights. So they won't step down this single step. And it got me thinking, you know, what's keeping us stuck? Why do we stay in these structures that are not really aligned with our living nature, it seemed to me. And so I followed that question for 5 decades. I don't know, it's a weird kid. But I backpacked in Hawaii studying island biogeography. I lived in the Bering Sea on a fishing boat, studying whales. I went to the Galapagos with that many, and I visited the Amazon headwaters. And I was just, you know, how are all these organisms creating conditions conducive to life through each other? And why do we struggle to do the same? If we're, you know, relatives, if we were shaped by the same process, why? And so I studied these deep patterns. You know, I was trying to understand what is the deep patterns of these organisms, and where did we step off? And what I saw was these deep patterns. The primary one is our biological imperative that every organism has. And you have to secure the exchanges that you need in order to grow and develop long and well enough to launch your descendants into a future rich with possibilities. And all organisms were shaped to do this because the ones that did left more successful offspring. Right. So this is the work that I've been working on. And a lot of you are probably familiar with Regenesis Institute for Regenerative Practice. And they use these kind of frameworks that are mapping the deep patterns of life. And you can use them as kind of a scaffold for your own work. And so I discovered them and I loved it. And so I actually hired one of their faculty members to help me create my own frameworks that go with all the team stuff, so we can use it. So, but the essential thing is that we all have this biological purpose, this reproductive purpose, and it takes place in a place, an ecological niche. So we have a role in our world, and that's where we get our exchanges from. And we do that through perceiving and response. And to get the nutrients we need, whatever we need to get through exchange in order to fulfill our reproductive purpose. So it's a pattern and it's a process. And it works for any organism. This is this book. So this book has all these in it. And it's a process of not only diversification, but also integration, that organisms are getting bound together through their exchanges. At the same time, they're becoming more diverse. And the more diverse they become, the more they make those exchanges, because they can't take on every role. And the other thing, so diversity, it turns out, excuse me, is the raw feedstock of evolution and its limiting factor. Ronald Fisher in 1930 showed that the rate of adaptation available to a population is proportional to the amount of diversity in that population. So that's really the bottom line there, is that extinction is what happens when the options run out. And so life is always investing in future possibility for its offspring, for its descendants. And it does that through investing in more complementary, reliable, and reciprocal partners, what we might call trust. And that life is always creating conditions conducive to more life. And that's Janine Banks. I ended up studying with Robert Trivers, who's like arguably the, he's done the most in evolutionary biology. He just passed away in March, but he made many contributions here. I don't think he would appreciate being called the father of evolutionary psychology, but he kind of was. And I loved his work. I was just struck by it like electricity, and I've done that ever since, because it showed that we're the product of the same processes. These same deep patterns are what is shaping our lives. And from there, I went to Ethiopia and studied these baboons. And so they're very different in their social behavior, in the way they live and everything. And I was fascinated by that. But what struck me, and they interbreed in this hybrid zone. So I was doing population genetics work, studying the actual speciation of these organisms in a place where our ancestors also speciated during that same time. So it's a really good model for understanding Neanderthal and human introgression and those other patterns that we're looking at now. But what struck me watching these two baboons and how different they were is that the Hamadryas desert baboon has these very ritualized behaviors. The males are constantly flashing their rumps to each other, and it's sort of like the way we smile or shake hands or bow, that it disarms the usual dominance response so they can work together. And I saw this, I was like, oh, it's a lot like ants and bees have these same kind of ritual communications, and we do too. And so it occurred to me that not only were these baboons converging on a superorganism or eusocial way of life, but that so were we. The pattern was the same. And this is David Sloan Wilson that I work with now. And what he showed was that it's the same process of this diversification and integration. That if groups are competing, if there's more collaboration within the group than there is competition, then you start getting selection between groups. So instead of between individuals. So if you think about, then the competition is between the ant colonies, not the ants within a colony. And the same pattern is working in our lives. And not only that, excuse me, the same patterns are at work in terms of parasitism. That superorganisms are plagued by these parasites, these social parasites, and it follows the same pattern as a superorganism, as the nature of a superorganism. That they use propaganda pheromones to confuse the host, and then that allows them to nip into the colony and take over the queen. And then the whole colony is working for the parasite instead of the queen. And it goes by the same patterns, the same. And so I wrote about all this stuff in this book. So what happened, I started writing this stuff, and it just took on a life of its own because I'm really a writer. And so there's just stories and stories. So I ended up separating all this out into the stories and the frameworks. Now, what happened is, at that point in my life, I realized these superorganism species are taking on different kinds of roles, and then they share, and that grows the capacity of the whole colony. And that's what they're doing. And so I thought, if we are superorganisms like that, why do we live this way? Why are we competing for grades and promotions and competing to be the same? In other superorganisms, they're becoming more different, and they're sharing more, and that grows their capacity as a whole. And so that's our nature, and yet everything we do is designed against it. So at that point, I was like, forget about academics. I went to work in corporate as a genetic engineer, of all things. And that was even worse. So I ended up going to work for my husband and running a business. So we had our own business for 12 years, and it was wonderful. We had 2 children. We lived by the beach, by our favorite surf break. But our daughter passed away unexpectedly. And so, and that just kicked off a domino effect of, my husband lost his, he just had a breakdown. And so we lost our business, everything, boom, 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 boom. And I ended up with 3 children on my own. And they all had autism or ADHD. And they were all, young. 2 of them were in diapers. And I was trying to hold that together. And it wasn't easy. But what I did, I thought, okay, what do I have? What can I do? And I looked at, I know these patterns of adaptation. I know these patterns. So I thought, can I put them to work in my own life to get out of this situation? You might know this one from Regenesis, but the law of 3, that you have a purpose, but there's things in the way. And so what do organisms do? They adapt, and they find a 3rd way. And so that's what I set out to do. And then one day I discovered biomimicry. I heard on the radio, Janine Benyus, and I was like, what? That is what I need to be doing. That's me. So I just put my all into it. I started writing these columns, this column, the biomimicry manual, and ended up with like 3 million readers on that platform. So I was able to launch a Kickstarter, and I wrote my book, and it all came together from that. But here's what I found. Biomimicry was so exciting. And I worked for many companies doing biomimicry innovation consulting. And here's an example, Pax Water Technologies. This guy is Jay Harmon. He's an Australian surfer and inventor. And he saw how the waves went and the shells went. And he thought, well, there's something to that. There's something magical to that. And so he actually froze a whirlpool, froze it, and then he cast it into an impeller. And it turns out now that these fans and impellers, 85% quieter and more effective than the traditional fans and impellers that we use. And that's 8% of global energy use. So it's dramatic, right? And yet, so he went to, the military engineers and such, they just laughed at him. They laughed him out of the room. They wouldn't even look at it. Because everybody knows the fastest way from point A to point B is a straight line, not a wave. So they didn't look at it. But now he's, this is like in municipalities all over the world now. So what struck me from that, I saw the same kinds of patterns with our clients, is that they couldn't get the full value of biomimicry. And why was that? It's because they couldn't see. They couldn't see the possibility. They didn't think that way. And what I realized was that, if you look at STEM logos, if you Google STEM logos, you won't see a single living thing in any of them. There's nothing alive. And yet everything we do is biological. So why are we designing for machines when we're living things? And what I realize is that the brightest minds and the most trained minds are really grilled in this kind of mechanistic thinking. We're good at it. All of us are really good at it. And yet it's really not, the way life works. And what was exciting to me about biomimicry was that that it had the answers to our problems, that nature was already sequestering carbon, and these processes that actually created life, created possibility. So that's what really set me on fire about it. And yet we were designing like this. And this is in San Diego, I think. But life doesn't work like that. You can't just it takes a lot of energy and input to keep nature in place like this, and you see it in our agriculture. You have to keep adding inputs instead of cultivating this diversity that does it by itself. And so we're stuck in this machine mind. And so I thought, well, but look at the way that the bees and the ants do it. I know this stuff. So Teeming, I thought, these self-organizing evolutionary processes, and specifically ones that are for superorganisms. And so I wrote Teeming, and it did really well. It really changed things for me. And a lot of organizations really like that. The WebEx is partly designed on this. They use some of the things. And as you see, the patterns that apply to every organism also apply to superorganisms. And this stuff is super fascinating. I just wanted to show you that it exists. And again, it's the shared purpose now, going down to a community garden where there's, symbionts that are held close that you take care of and nurture. And so it's this deep pattern. And then collective intelligence is the perception that we do it together. And it relies on our diversity and our autonomy and this stigmergic communication. Those simple rules that seem so ritualized that I noticed with the baboons. And then this team of teams where we're taking on specialized roles and we give each other mutual aid, and we use distributed leadership to maintain our social immunity. And that allows us to grow our collective capacity and do all these amazing things and respond in real time to complex challenges without telling anyone what to do. And then that's how we gather the nutrients. And the way superorganisms do it is they go out in a distributed way to forage. They bring back little particles of value, and then they upcycle them, often in partnership with other symbionts, to get the value that feeds the offspring, feeds the queen, and the whole colony works that way. And what you see here too is that, this whole idea of the biological imperative, that we're trying to launch successful offspring into the future. We do it collectively. Not everybody's a breeder. Not everybody's, it's a collective phenomenon, and our children are collective. So this is teaming up. So this is the project. I had all these companies saying, but how do we do it? And Nadia Abusif is here, was like, how do I do it in a real organization? And so I thought, all right, I've got to find an applied way to do this. So this was the project, to write this, but the stories kept flowering through the cracks. It really took on a life of its own. So it ended up, I've been in a cave for almost 3 years now writing this, and it turned out to be 4 books. That's why it took so long. And then each book has a corresponding capacity that we need to grow in order to live the way other organisms do without thinking so hard. And so here's some of the stories that came along. I discovered regenesis. So I went down this rabbit hole. I started working for Geoversity School for Biocultural Leadership in Panama. That was mind-blowing. So this place, 13,000 acres of old-growth cloud forest that abuts the autonomous Cunayala territory. And so we worked with them, and I got to, meet some of their climate activists and hike through their territory. And it really opened my eyes to what I call living design, which is just simply living the way other organisms do without thinking so hard. the gazelle and the cheetah shaping each other through our, specific roles. And so that became, I've got this levels of biomimicry, which is inspired by Carol Sanford's levels of work. And none of this isn't really a hierarchy. It's that we can't even do biomimicry until we gain these capacities. They made a movie of it. This is great. It actually did really well. It's a full-length feature. But then COVID came. So I couldn't get to Panama. I was like, oh no, I can't even do this. So I thought I'd always, from my youngest age, with my dad being an architect, I always thought, could I have like a Black Mountain College, a non-school where people are, learning these deep patterns and applying them in a self-organizing way. And I thought, could we do like prototypes for water capture or, all the things. And so that was the idea. But this came to me. So I've got 86-acre ranch in the Borrego Desert. And this is the only town in the USA surrounded by a state park. It's the second largest state park in the nation. And it's just stunning. And so, I want to be able to take people here and show them the deep patterns. We just take walks and then they apply them to their own challenges, is the idea. Seeding Change came along. I work with them now to work with communities, especially Indigenous communities. Like, they already know how to do living design. Let's go back to this one. People, the Kumeyaay and the Cahuilla lived here for 12,000 years. And you can see the evidence of their lives all over. And the stonework is still there, everything's still there. And so I actually, bring the children here, the Kumeyaay children, so they can it's magical to walk on the land and see the evidence of your ancestors there, and they can gather the clay and make pottery and fire them on the hearths that they fired them on, just 100 years ago. So ultimately, I'd like this to be a land back initiative. There's another 1,000 acres surrounding, so that's the goal. And this is the Borrego Institute for Living Design. So the idea is that by using these deep patterns and applying them in your own life, you can create these ripples of impact that are far beyond what you could do as an individual. Organisms are doing this all the time. And the same patterns apply to us. Life finds a way. Love that. And the hardest part is just getting in the water. This is from the film. So here's what I have, this Wayfinders. It's a 10-day intensive that takes you through these patterns, and as a workbook that I created for it, and so you can apply them to your own challenges. I think it's super cool. So here's some questions for you to take into the breakout. What vision are you carrying? And how would you design differently if you were going to use that levels of biomimicry? If you were going to innovate with nature's inspiration, how is nature doing the challenges that you're facing? And if you're going to organize using human nature, these superorganism patterns, and if you were going to design to cultivate possibilities for an unknown future rather than control them, how would you design differently? And what would be possible if you did that? Okay. I'm going to stop the share. How are we doing for time? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That was fun.
Amazing. Okay. So Carolina, we'll hand it over to you.
Yes. Okay, so I just dropped the questions in the chat. for everyone. If you want to like take a look at it for a few seconds, and then I'm gonna open the breakouts and I'll let everyone in. So just letting you all take a second to check it out. And I see, well, I'm gonna readjust the breakouts because I see people dropping off as soon as we say that it's time to do this. So let me do a bit of rearranging here.
And if you want, you can take a screenshot of the questions and we'll try to rebroadcast them. I don't know if that's possible to do a full-on rebroadcast.
I don't think I can broadcast an image from Zoom, but yeah, okay. I can try to broadcast it from in text. It does have a little bit
Yeah, just text. Yeah.
of a limit.
Okay. Well, we'll do our best. And how long do folks have and how do we want them to use their time?
Yes, we have 15 minutes for these questions. So as usual, we kind of inviting you to use them to guide the conversation. It's a lot to cover in 15 minutes for everyone. So we kind of want to invite you to respond to whatever is alive for you at the moment. And to also be mindful of time and be mindful that there are others with you that want to share. So please be careful to speak mindfully and listen as well. Make sure that everyone has time. Um, let's do a little bit of teaming like that. Okay, so I think we are mostly set. There will be one breakout room with two people. So I'm going to open the breakouts now. Enjoy the conversation.
And how long is it again? 15
It
minutes?
was,
Okay,
yeah, I just sent
great.
everyone
And
off.
if you have any trouble, come back to the main room and we'll help you.
They're already all sent to the room. Okay, let's see. And this is an interesting thing that I've noticed. Okay, wait a second.
See you back. Welcome back. We're very happy to see your faces again. We hope you had a very rich conversation. No doubt it felt rushed because these things always do. 15 minutes is never enough time. But hopefully you began to scratch the surface and you learned a few things and connected, and you can take some of this and dive deeper on Tamsin's website or in her books or etc. So we're now going to spend a few minutes just hearing from a few of you with reflections that you might want to share from your group or on behalf of your group. And then we are going to move. I'm going to hand it back over to Tamsin. She's got a few more slides to share, and she's going to take some of your questions. So I'll give you all just a moment to consider whether you'd like to raise your hand and share something that you learned or were inspired by or were confused by but yeah, this part is for sharing, and then we'll have some time for some actual questions for Tamsin. Hi, Google Pixel 6a.
Hi there. I'm Anani. Like Tamsin and I know each other pretty well for a while. It was great conversation. And like the perennial question is like or actually there's tons of perennial questions really, but it was really lovely like talking about some of these ideas and meeting other people that are excited about them. Um, you know, Tamsin talks a lot about like flat decentralized horizontal networks kind of being like the substrate that social organizations are based on, and like a lot of our social organizations, businesses, governments, etc., are top-down hierarchies. And so like how do you transition how do you keep a decentralized horizontal network alive in such a in such a paradigm, and especially like when those collectives even start to work, which is really hard to do. It's really hard to get them to stick together and stuff like that without that kind of like leadership or charismatic, person in the center of it. But even if you do get something going, how do you keep it going when that outer paradigm is threatened by it? You
Mm.
know, yeah. So I'll just leave it there because there's tons of vectors I could go off on.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't know, Tamsin, if we want to reserve that as a question for the Q&A
yeah,
section.
I
Yeah.
will.
Okay, thank you. All right, Tom, do you have a reflection you want to share?
Oh, you're on mute, Tom.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Near the end of our little breakout, there was a quick conversation about the yin yang nature of problems and solutions, that solutions tend to generate problems in complex systems and living systems, and that one of the things that we could take from that is that we need to learn to become more competent at the opposite, which is taking the problems to generate solutions. We don't necessarily get out of that cycle because they're mutually defining, coexisting per the yin yang Taoist vision of such things. So learning how to live in that cycle without thinking you know everything that needs to be known about it, uh, and being responsive, and that there's something to know about how to be responsive in useful ways. Check.
Beautiful. Thank you. Lovely reflection. David, nice to see you. Can you hear me? Do you want to go on, unmute yourself, David? There you go.
Sorry, I was stuck in the chat. So we, I think, had a nicely wide-ranging conversation, and anyone in my group, feel free to chime in. I think one thing that was noted is just that they're kind of pretty big questions. There's a lot of understanding that a group would need, I think, to embrace, or probably some shared principles to really kind of, I think, dive in deeply and get the most out of the answers. But one thing that came out across all of us was permaculture as sort of a design system. And I would say that's less about the individuals and more about sort of observing on sites. But there's a lot of kind of rich principles that help you sort of design with nature, with nature from there. And there's more details we could go into, but let me leave it there. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, David. Lovely contribution. Okay, Ashwani, let's hear from you.
Thank you. And to build on what Tom recollected from our discussion, and I think he gets the point I was trying to make. I think the biggest problem we face is that we believe we can find answers. Okay? The idea that the thing can be solved is what's getting in the way. It's a messy process. If you look at complex systems theory, link it to wicked problems, you realize that there's more than one way of describing the problem. No one person or one group can describe a problem completely and agreeably. If that's the case, you can't have an agreeable solution. And if we're stuck in this idea, we want to solve this problem. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Yes, the paradox of problem solutions. Very interesting and confounding. Okay, Emmanuel, let's hear from you.
Hi, thank you, Tamsin. That was a great presentation. I was with David and Otonet in the group, and we had answers to those big questions, yes, but after looking at the answers, the questions again, it was like, wait a second, not to, because we are like-minded community meeting here, Tamsin, and so what we hear is sort of familiar for us, but so many of us they don't think that they have a vision that they're carrying, and they don't think that looking at nature and inspiration is something that could help them. So then I was like, how do we engage? And then I'm lucky because I'm a permaculture designer and a coach. And as a weaver, it's like, wow, that's my mission, to try to get more of us to think that, yeah, they can actually be inspired by nature, and they can look at solutions that nature has had for us, except for we were closed off and not paying enough attention and not connecting. So that was really great. Thank you for the epiphany.
Oh, wonderful. We love an epiphany.
Epiphanies
Love that. Okay, let's hear from, I know you're a pair, Maria and
I'm Megan Mellon. I also registered,
Megan.
but we're together, so might as well be different. I just want to share the biggest. So I got most inspired from the talk. So thank you so much, Dr. Tamsin. I got inspired to look at political systems from a biological standpoint. So like, how do bees or baboons govern? How do the baboon systems govern when they're making a new species? Do species ever bifurcate? if so, how do they govern once they do the inbreeding? But then that also like flares out again to make more diversity. And I just never, that never occurred to me as like a resource space to go and like sit in the woods about. So I'm very thankful and will take that into my practice personally. In this conversation, I think one of the last speakers also, this thing about wicked problems, how no one problem can ever be fully described by any one person, that actually sort of mirrors my biggest observation just being in the space with Dr. Tamsin here, which is like there is a real world sense that we got to hear about today of this being, of this little child creating this world of teaming. And I really think that the world of teaming is a very supportive structure to help describe and engage with the big world. But I just had this new flash that like what does it mean to be a species of life, right? Not just humans, but what does it mean to be a species when part of what is going on here is this plurality of world senses? That's another whole governance challenge. When we talk about the problem or the answer, like there's something there that is beyond democracy in terms of how we might think about it. I think there are cultures and undoubtedly there are natural species that like know how to engage with that, but there is a different level of tenderness that I haven't really heard mapped to the way that we speak about things, the way that we agree on endeavors worth investing in, et cetera. So that's the thing I wanted to mirror back is just actually watching the life story and watching your challenges develop, Tamsin, was just really enriching for us. So thank you for sharing also like the breakdowns process because we know that that's the rich stuff, right? Like that's the hummus, that's where it comes from. So I'm just very thankful that you did not edit that out. I think we're really trained to edit that out. And I think we felt really enriched by the fullness of the telling. So thank you for basing also your leadership today in biology as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely. Okay, last one. Inga, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Absolutely. Hello, and thank you.
Hi.
And thank you for that lovely talk, Tamsin. I really struck it lucky because I was in the two with Lisa. And I have a corporate background and I'm working very much in climate and nature and foundations. And so it was lovely to be able to relate and her knowledge, depth of knowledge on how this relates to the business world, I found was really, really interesting. And also the political world. And it struck me just two deep things that I come away with. One is the importance of feedback loops, and how we neglect those at our peril, and that the most successful democracies, like for instance Switzerland and others, where they have a lot of referenda and have feedback loops and act on them, is very interesting. And of course, that's also true in the corporate world. And then the other bit was this flash of knowledge of sense of and reinforced by Ashwana, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but of uncertainty and constant movement. And I think this is something we could really build on for a world that is more and more and more uncertain. I mean, in the climate space, and particularly in places like the Arctic and Antarctic and things like that, we're beginning to see the whole system unraveling. And even here in the UK, the uncertainty of our weather from one week to the other. And that's a global phenomenon. So how can we tell that the biomimicry story, or bring that knowledge and experience of biomimicry into the illusion of certainty and be managing uncertainty? So I appreciate I've asked more questions than I've answered, but that was a really important thing for me to take away. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Inga. Wow, what a wonderful set of reflections. Thank you all for contributing into the humus that we're building here today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Tamsin to close us out on the content portion of today, including her Q&A that she's going to entertain with you all. And then we'll do a quick wrap. And so stick with us. We've got a good 20 minutes, 24 minutes.
Well,
Tamsin, over to you.
hi. That was awesome. Thank you so much for listening and engaging like that. I did want to speak to some of those points. You know, Anani came on and asked, how do we maintain these decentralized systems? And that's something we don't we don't address very much is that parasitism is real. And it's easy to say that, to take a kumbaya kind of approach, and that we're all together and we're all one. But in reality, there are parasitic elements that are always trying to penetrate and steal our common wealth within communities. Ants face this all the time. So I think that's a really powerful place to look. The way that, the third book I write is all about the leafcutter ants and how they protect their colonies. And how they actually, it's interesting, they start their cultures from scratch frequently, all the time, so that they don't, cultivate those parasitic elements all the time. It's a really interesting area. And I talk about distributed leadership and the bonobo revolution, how individuals are coming together to protect that diversity and autonomy so that the collective intelligence can emerge. And we don't talk about that enough. I think that's really powerful. The permaculture thing, yes, and that's really powerful because these indigenous cultures that permaculture is, rooted in, they already knew how to do this. They already know how to do this. 12,000 years in this desert habitat. And it was like a store for them. They could walk around and just pick things off the bushes and eat them, It was a very generous world. And they have to maintain that. And part of that then goes to the third thing of this problem solution and the perspectives and the plurality of perspectives, is that key to their survival was this approach of respect for other organisms and this assumption that we're in the story together and that we don't know the whole story because we can't see through their eyes. And it's really the human capacity to imagine through other eyes is the foundation of our empathy and our human nature. And we don't talk about that enough either, that the importance of imagination and being able to see through other eyes and have other perspectives. So I thought that was really good. And then the governance beyond democracy is, and I think of governance as the simple rules that govern our connections, our exchanges. And they're self-organizing in the ants and the bees. So I think there's something powerful in there. So I thought all those were really wonderful. I just wanted to show you a few more slides, and then we'll go into Q&A. All right. Okay, that was so great. Thanks, guys. I just wanted to say that I created so much material. There's like literally 4 books of stories and then 4 books that are just for you to go through these processes for your own challenges, whatever you face. And then this Living Design Fellowship puts them all together. So and I'm looking just for not too many people that want to go through this with me and as a founding cohort to kind of develop this stuff. So I would be really honored if you want to join me for that. All this stuff is at my school, teemingtogether.com. It's free to join. And if you do join, you can read the book, but also you'll get notified when these other things come together. So I'd love to see you there. It's a really nice group of people. And then don't forget that Wayfinders, which I'm super excited about. And I think if any challenge that you're facing, I think you will just love going through it. I think and I should say that it's all asynchronous. It's all videos, a daily video, and then a workbook. So don't worry about your schedule. That's all I want to say about that. And I'd love to hear your questions.
Okay, and just a gentle request, if just please try to be concise and go as one of my teachers, Roshi Jones, says, go to essence in your question, please. Hi, Lisa.
Well, that's part of my setup is that people have to submit their questions in writing in advance.
Oh, we love to hear from you, Lisa.
Sorry. Hi, Tamsin. It's so exciting to see this come together. I got a little sneak peek earlier in the year. I have my big question is I love your framework that you've created. And is the purpose of that framework to be able to put your own um, projects, the thing that you're working on onto that framework? That's what I'm sensing. Yes.
Yes, it's like a scaffold for anything that any organism does in the world. And so you can see where our solutions or our approaches are falling off that. So it's a guide, it's a measure, it's a metric. Yeah.
Can you do it? Can you use it metaphorically? Because I understand, completely get it that, this is you can do it on a biological level, but can we work in a more metaphorical level, or is that getting too far away?
No, it's not a metaphor. It's we're living things, and so it's very literal.
Okay.
And so you can use the evolution pentad to look at, okay, in a any living system, in a ecosystem, you've got all these species, and the forest gets mature and there's no openings for upstarts, so you need disturbance. So you can use that kind of framework to look at what developmental stage is this system in, and what does it need to feed the organism. So you can look at it that way. And then the superorganism one we can use for our own teams, and where are we falling down there. And the parasitic one is really good for diagnosing and then creating simple rules that prevent those things. So that's pretty powerful. And then that adaptive law of three is really powerful for approaching your challenges. Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's see. I see your hands, Ashwani and Google Pixel CA. I just want to leave a little space to see if there might be other voices that want to come into the room before we call back on you again. Are there other questions from anyone? Okay, all right. Well, let's okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name the first time, Google Pixel. Can you tell us again?
Yeah, sorry, I just missed my window of changing my name properly. Inani is the name that I go by.
Anani. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of going to go back into a little bit where I was the direction I was heading, but so like I'm involved in Burning Man, and there's a chapter in Burning Man's story where it starts as kind of like this more collective oriented thing, and then after 1996 there's some certain kind of catastrophic things that happen, and then basically the state forces them into organizing in a more way that they would recognize, and so I guess the question that I have is like, if you are a collective that's decentralized and you are forced with that kind of hard object that is wanting you to make a different decision, or basically they want to hold like some kind of level of accountability or something like that. It's like, how do you navigate that? Or, and even if you didn't have that outside agency, like how does a decentralized collective like handle that kind of that precipice of scale of
Yeah.
Like I hate the refrain anarchy doesn't scale. Like every time I hear that I was like, no, I think that's only seems to be the case because like it's forced by other hierarchies to form a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I think of it in two ways. Eleanor Ostrom, 8 core principles for growing commonwealth together. And indigenous communities have done this since time immemorial, and the same patterns work for ants and bees. And so one of those, the 8th principle, I believe, is that the surrounding governance has to respect their sovereignty. And so, it's kind of a hard stop right there, but so then the second thing I think about is that then it becomes a constraint of the environment, no different than, the ridiculous heat that we have here, or, the amount of water. And so then you can take that law of three and look at how can we adapt based on what's available to us, what's present. And there's all kinds of solutions for that.
Thank you very much. Oh, Rick, nice to see you. Let's hear from you.
Hello, hello. Jasmine, I really looking forward to learning more about your body of work. It's a phenomenal tour de force.
Thank you.
One thing about metaphors, and we all know this, there's always upsides and downsides with all metaphors. And it's taking yes and yes but when we use metaphors. But I like to stretch the envelope on the limits of biomimicry and permaculture metaphors for dealing our wicked problems. And we don't have time to answer the question I'm about to put in the chat, but I did an AI search on it to start the groundwork for slow thinking. We just don't spend enough time on slow thinking, as you well know. And I'm not going to even say what the question is. If people interested, I'll put it in the chat. If it makes you curious, you can look at the AI result that I generated. It's just academic fodder at the moment. It needs a lot of reworking, but I'll share it. But thank you very much for sharing your incredible body of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Other questions? Let's hear from folks, especially if you haven't raised your hand yet or shared so far. Can't believe there's silence. Okay.
I do want to say Rick, in your post here, I don't think of biomimicry and permaculture as metaphors. I think of them, and that is the jump to living design, is that we are organized.
Yeah,
like
I agree with you. I'm thinking about when you're elevating it to human systems that are dynamic and emergent. And so I agree with you. Both and yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Brian. Let's hear from you. Good to see you. I know you came in late. You missed the whole kit and caboodle, but what you got?
Hi, Carrie, and thank you, Dr. I look forward to that. Thank you, Dr. Tamsin. I resonated when you said we need to go beyond species chauvinism, and you used other words, but and that is, we're dealing with an entire ecosystem. I like to say, all of humanity are brothers and sisters just 55,000 years ago. But if we go 55 million years ago, we're sharing all these genes and all this DNA in life, and it's like astounding how common we are with the rest of all of our species, including the insects and the plants. And so, this idea of really supporting genetic biodiversity is so essential. So that resonated for me. Thank you. I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, Mary. Nice to see you.
Hi. So my question is around the term superorganism, and I guess my associations with that as like the human created problem, like poly culmination of problems that we're in here now. And I'm wondering, if you can elaborate on that.
Up because a lot of people use superorganism in the Gaia sense of this, one world kind of brain kind of thing. And I don't think that way, because I think of in terms of natural selection. So there's nothing to select in that. So it doesn't work in a biological sense, even though, yes, everything's connected and everything is co-creating. And then a lot of times we hear about the superorganism, the human superorganism, as this, growing global, mind kind of noosphere-ish thing. And that is like the Argentine ants, these super colonies that have spread, from Argentina to Portugal and California and all over. And they just create these super colonies with multiple queens. But if that's only been the last 40 years, and mathematically, that is very prone to parasitism, and it probably won't last in that way. So this human superorganism idea, I don't think has legs, because it ultimately comes down to place and our relationship. Everybody eats, everybody poops. It's the pattern. And that's what the other thing we're missing is this kind of global untethered thing that, in the end we eat, and our things that we eat grow in a place. And it may be that it grows in a different place, and maybe we have to come to a different understanding of that. We have to take care of that place too. And so there you've got that, but it's still these colonies that are based in a place that feed us. And when the systems break down, we're going to see that, and it's not in evolution is not about the daily life. It's about making it through the hard time, because if you don't, that's the end of that. And so I think more about it in terms of that. And what was the other thing? Oh no, I think I got it. I hope I got it. All right.
Okay, Ashwani, I'll call on you now.
Sure. Thank you, Tamsin. That was really interesting and parallels a lot of my thinking about systems thinking. I think one of the mistakes we make is assume that words are good communication. They aren't. They're ambiguous, always. So you use two phrases, living systems and superorganism. These mean different things to different people.
Absolutely.
When I hear living systems, my mind goes to nested scale hierarchies. Nested system. Okay? So what we call so living systems is not a singularity. It includes humans, animals, plants, anything that's subject to evolution. Right? And that includes society and thought. What we think changes over time. What we believe changes over time. Is that, in your view, part of your idea of superorganism?
Thank
Yes.
you. Great question.
Thank you. And that actually put up one more thing I wanted to say about superorganism and our definitions on things. And that's, oh yeah, did you want to say one more thing? No, so I wanted to say that the reason I use the term superorganism instead of eusocial, which would be the more, the biologically correct term, is because I wanted to define my own things, and so that I could speak about them in the way I want to speak about them, right? A biologist might say, well, no, we're not a superorganism, we're not eusocial. I just wanted to get away from all that. So, in my books, I always define the thing the way that I use it. I think that's important. And that the simple, what you're talking about, the thoughts are the simple rules. And even in living design, I go back to what is the source of the thing, and it's a story that we tell about the beginning of the world. And everything is coherent from that. It emerges from that. Our language, our words, our thoughts emerge from that. And so like indigenous cultures, they have stories that anchor them to the land and their understanding about the roles and the proper way to be in that place. And they change over time and what have you, but it's a story at the core of it. And so I think a lot of our challenges is because we don't have a coherent story. We're just glomming little pieces of various stories and trying to make a world out of it. And it just doesn't add up. It doesn't add up to one. And that's part of what I like these frameworks, is that it is one whole system, and it does add up to one. And so you can really see how I think of like finger weaving. It's one system, even though the simple rules change over time. And our whale flipper is our hand, and that's what happens over in evolution. But it's the simple rules and that go back to the story that we tell, and that's how we maintain our superorganisms, is through those stories.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want to just offer to Rick G. I know you've wrote a question/query in the chat. Would you like to voice that out loud as our last question today?
Yeah, where's that? Okay, let's see. I saw it. Is it this one? How might we integrate equity, how might we integrate equity, meta-governance, and ecosystemic singularity, meta-learning leadership to generate the infinite abundance of collaborative intelligence to build the metanoia pronoia alliance to unleash co-creativity, imagination, innovation, and entrepreneurship, to go beyond the biomimicry and permaculture metaphors, to understand and address our complex entanglement of self-inflicted wicked problems and co-create fair, free, flourishing futures on a regenerating planet. Oh yeah, baby. Let's do that.
So that's a great question too, and that we could stay here all day for that one, but I was actually pointing to the question from Rick G. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, sorry. Oh, where's that?
Two Ricks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wrote, and I was thinking about this as this whole hour and a half was unfolding. I wonder now if frequency itself is also a language and one that nature uses more natively.
Well, I mean, sound is frequency and vision too, right? And like in the Amazon, you notice that first off, it's super loud, everyone's yammering. But also it's very high pitched, it's tuned to the environment it's in. Like it has to cut through, it has to travel. And the same, with the whales. Everybody's tuning their sense and response to the place. And that's part of it. So yeah, but I don't know if I answered that, but that's how I think about that.
Love that question. Great question.
Yeah, no.
Worth pondering. Well, we are at the end of the session. It always goes really quickly, and I just want to say thank you again to you, Dr. Tamsin Woolley-Barker, for this amazing narrative that you walked us through today and your important fundamental work, and for joining us for the System of Systems Thinkers Women in Systems Thinking Dialogue Series, the second in our series for 2026. And we want to invite you all again to stay tuned for our next dialogue. We don't have it penned yet, but it will be coming along soon. And also, we invite you to explore our rich history of dialogues with some of the most profound and impactful women in the systems thinking field and beyond in the last 5 years. So you can find that on our YouTube channel, on our website at sost.life. And we welcome you back in conversation in the coming weeks and months. And we are grateful for your participation today. And again, I don't know if you want to share some closing thoughts, Dr. Woolley-Barker, but just want to thank everyone for being here. And thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm so thrilled that so many of you showed up and with such great thoughts and questions and insights. It's really rewarding. I've been working on this in isolation, so it's really, really great to share it and have it be received. And I just am really excited about what the future's bringing for us all. I feel it's like times are more uncertain than ever, but I know that life finds a way, and we will too.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you to my colleagues, Antoinette and Carolina. Bye.
Bye.
Have a great